How safe do you feel right now? Sitting there, in your room, in your home, you probably feel secure. You've locked the doors, you know the sounds of your house, you're surrounded by the familiar. But that feeling of safety, it's a fragile illusion. It's a thin veil separating our quiet, orderly lives from a chaos we refuse to acknowledge. Tonight, we're going to pull that veil back. We're not talking about monsters from movies or ghosts from campfire tales. We're talking about the chilling moments when the real world becomes more terrifying than any fiction. We have two stories for you. One is about a man who walked into the wilderness and simply erased himself from existence. The other is about a family who found that the thing you should fear most was already inside the house with them, waiting. These are the stories that stick with you, long after the screen goes dark. Our first story takes us to the vast, beautiful, and deeply unforgiving wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. It's a place where you can find profound peace, but it's also a place that doesn't care if you live or die. In the fall of 2018, an experienced hiker and nature photographer named Liam Miller decided to take a solo, 4-day trek through a remote trail in the Cascade Mountains. He was 28 years old in peak physical condition and had done trips like this dozens of times. He packed meticulously. He had a GPS beacon, extra food, and top-of-the-line gear. He told his family his exact route and his expected return date. Liam Miller did everything right, and that's what makes what happened next so terrifying. Liam's journey began on a crisp October morning. He sent his sister a final text from the trailhead. It was a picture of the trail marker, with the sun filtering through the towering pine trees. The caption read, "Into the quiet. See you on the other side. Love you." That was the last time anyone ever heard from him. 4 days passed, then 5. Liam didn't return. His family, knowing his punctuality, immediately reported him missing. Search and rescue teams were dispatched within hours. They had his planned route, his GPS data. They were confident they'd find him, perhaps with a sprained ankle or waiting out a minor issue. The search began at the trailhead where he sent his last text. The first day yielded nothing, nor the second. The terrain was difficult, a maze of dense forest, steep ravines, and sudden disorienting fog banks. The search teams were professionals, but even they felt the oppressive silence of the area. It was on the third day of the search that a volunteer team found Liam's campsite, but the scene they discovered only deepened the mystery. It was located just off the main trail, in a small, protected clearing. His tent was perfectly set up. Inside, his wallet, keys, and phone were placed neatly on top of his folded clothes. His phone's battery was dead. Outside the tent, his state-of-the-art stove and cooking gear were clean and packed away. The strange part? His supply of dehydrated food, enough for another 2 days, was untouched. He hadn't cooked his last meal there. More disturbingly, his expensive, all-weather sleeping bag and his hiking boots were gone. His GPS beacon, the one piece of equipment designed to save his life, was sitting on a rock next to the tent, switched off. Think about that for a second. An experienced hiker in the middle of a cold mountain night would never leave their camp without their boots and sleeping bag. It's a death sentence. And why would he turn off the one device that could guarantee his rescue? The search intensified around the campsite. They brought in canine units, but the dogs would follow a scent for a few dozen yards into the dense woods and then stop, confused, circling back to the tent as if the trail had just ended, as if he had simply been lifted into the air. Days turned into weeks. The official search was eventually scaled back, but his family and volunteers continued to look. They found nothing. No scrap of clothing, no sleeping bag, no boots. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Foul play was considered, but there were no signs of a struggle at the campsite. An animal attack was ruled out for the same reason. The scene was pristine, almost peaceful. The case went cold, filed away as another tragic but ultimately unsolved wilderness vanishing. It's one of those deeply unsettling cases that contribute to the lore of unexplained disappearances that haunt these remote places. But there's one final detail. 6 months later, a different hiker was exploring a cave about 5 miles off trail from Liam's campsite, an area that was far from his planned route. Inside, sheltering from the rain, his flashlight beam caught something etched into the cave wall. It was a single, crudely carved symbol, a spiral with a dot in the center. Police later found Liam's digital camera, which they'd recovered from his tent. On it, they went through his photos. Beautiful shots of mountains, trees, a sunset. And then the last photo. It was blurry, taken in near darkness, and appeared to be a photo of the ground. When they enhanced the image, they could just make out the same symbol, the spiral with a dot drawn in the dirt. He had seen it, or drawn it, the night he disappeared. The symbol has no known meaning in any local tribal lore or modern symbology. It remains a complete mystery. Liam Miller walked into the quiet and never came back, leaving behind only an impossible question mark. To vanish in the vast, wild outdoors is one kind of horror. It's a fear of the unknown, of nature's immense and indifferent power. But what if the horror isn't miles away in some dark forest? What if it's under your own feet? What if the threat isn't a wild animal or a sudden accident, but something that has been in your home long before you ever moved in? Our next story is about the Davis family and their American dream that turned into a waking nightmare. They learned that some doors are meant to stay closed forever. In 2011, Mark and Sarah Davis, along with their 7-year-old daughter Chloe, bought their first home. It was a charming older house in a quiet suburb in Ohio. It needed a little work, but it had good bones and a big backyard. It was perfect, almost. There was one feature of the house that Sarah found unsettling from the start: the crawl space. The entrance was a small, squared-off door in the back of a hallway closet, and it led down into the dark, earthen space beneath the house. For the first few months, life was idyllic. They painted walls, planted a garden, and Chloe made friends at her new school. The crawl space was forgotten. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. It was a sound, a faint, intermittent scratching sound that seemed to come from under the floorboards in the hallway, right near the crawl space door. Mark, being practical, assumed it was mice or raccoons. He set traps. He never caught anything. Then Chloe started talking about her new friend. She called him the Whisper Man. She said he lived in the quiet place under the house and would whisper stories to her through the floor at night. Sarah and Mark chalked it up to an overactive imagination, a common response for a child in a new environment. But Chloe's descriptions of him were oddly specific. She said he was very tall and skinny, like a spider, and that he was lonely because his old friends had all moved away. The activity in the house began to escalate. Objects would move on their own. A cup left on the kitchen counter would be found on the floor. The door to the hallway closet would be found slightly ajar in the morning, even though they were sure they had closed it. A cold, damp, earthy smell began to permeate the hallway, a smell like freshly dug grave soil. Sarah started to get genuinely scared. Late one night, she was woken up by a sound from Chloe's room. She went to check and found her daughter standing in the middle of the room, staring at the floor. When Sarah asked what was wrong, Chloe just whispered, "He's humming." And he's tapping. Sarah put her ear to the floorboards and heard nothing, but the look of pure fear on her daughter's face was undeniable. This was no longer a case of a house settling or an overactive imagination. They were beginning to believe they were experiencing one of those real paranormal encounters you only read about online. The breaking point came a week later. Mark was working late in his home office when he heard a distinct rhythmic tap, tap, tap coming from the hallway. It was slow, deliberate, and seemed to be coming from directly under the crawl space door. Fed up and determined to find a rational explanation, he grabbed a heavy flashlight and went to the closet. He pulled open the small door, revealing the dark, gaping maw of the crawl space. The earthy smell hit him like a physical blow. He shone the flashlight down. It was a cramped, dark space with pipes and support beams crisscrossing the dirt floor. He called out, "Is anyone down there?" Only silence answered. He took a deep breath and lowered himself into the darkness. The air was cold and still. He swept the beam of his flashlight across the space. Dust motes danced in the light. He saw old pipes, cobwebs, and then something else. In the far corner, almost hidden by shadows, was a small pile of objects. He shuffled closer. They were old children's toys, a faded wooden spinning top, a small porcelain doll with one eye missing, and a child's leather shoe, dating back to what looked like the early 20th century. As he stared at the pile, he felt it, a sudden, terrifying drop in temperature. His breath plumed in front of his face, and then he heard it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from the darkness right behind him. It wasn't made of words, but of pure, ancient malice. His fight-or-flight response kicked in. He scrambled backward, banging his head on a low-hanging pipe, and clawed his way out of the crawl space, slamming the small door shut. He ran to the bedroom, grabbed Sarah and Chloe, and they left the house that night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They never spent another night there. They sold the house at a massive loss to a property development company that was told nothing of their experience. The official story was that the house had foundation issues. The family moved across the country, trying to put the events behind them. But Chloe, even years later, would sometimes refuse to sleep without a light on, claiming she could sometimes hear faint whispering coming from under her bed. Whatever was in that crawl space wasn't a ghost of a person. It was something older, something tied to the land itself. A tenant that never leaves. A man who vanishes into thin air, leaving behind a riddle carved in stone. A family driven from their home by something ancient and malevolent living beneath their feet. These stories remind us that the world is much larger and much stranger than we can comfortably admit. They show us that the line between the normal and the nightmarish is paper thin, and you never know when you might step across it. What do you think happened to Liam Miller? And what was the entity living under the Davis family's home? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If these stories send a chill down your spine and you want to explore more of the unexplained, please show your support by hitting that like button. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the darkness. Thank you for watching, and try to sleep well.